Welcome to the keynote, the Office 3.0. The way we live, work and play is very differently than it was just a few decades ago. Thanks in large part to a network of connectivity that now encompasses most people on this planet. We'll take a look at the office and perhaps even the city of the future. Keep using the chat because our speaker will do a short presentation, a short talk actually, and after that it's all Q&A. You can ask him anything. He's an architect and engineer by training, and he teaches at the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he directs the Sensible City Lab. Professor Carlo Ratti. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, how are you? Good to see all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. But I want to put a few things on the table, and then we can have really a conversation. I really thought that the best way is to talk to each other. I think especially we're connecting so much digitally, and so instead of just flooding each other with slides, we can then have more conversation about this topic. And the topic is really related to what was just mentioned, about working from home, working from the office, working from everywhere, and in particular, what is the impact of physical absence, what we've been experiencing over the past 12 months on digital communication. I wanted to start by telling you a story from MIT. This is actually one of the images of MIT. MIT has a lot of sociable places. This MIT campus, very close to our lab. And the MIT campus, like many other campuses or offices worldwide, has been closed since the 23rd actually of March 2020. So over a year ago. Now, the interesting thing is that this lockdown could be probably you could say the most ambitious experiment to predict and measure the impact of physical space on human activity. And the reason is that we were monitoring, measuring anonymized data that actually represent the flow of emails on the MIT campus before the pandemic. So somehow you can say that was a way to get a good picture of the communications network or the social network of the MIT campus, social network captured by email. And then again, COVID arrived, and so we removed one key variable, which is physical space interaction. So here is actually the email network that we've been collecting, and then we started asking a few questions. Now that we're just connecting virtually, are we losing something? Well, if so, what are we losing in the transition into fully virtual communication? And we looked at many things on the network, many things stayed the same in the way we communicate, in the way we connect with other people, and so on. But then we started looking at the following, at weak ties. And weak ties are a concept that was introduced in 1973 by Mark Granovetter in a very seminal paper called The Strength of Weak Ties. And let me tell you what weak ties are. Well, think about all of your friends and think about some close friends. Well, let's say friends A and friend B. And A and B also know each other. Well, that is what you call a strong tie, and that creates a triangle if you plot it. If you plot it with lines or with edges, as people say in network science, got yourself to A, yourself to B, and A and B are also connected. You draw it, and then it's a triangle. So that's a strong tie. But a weak tie, usually somebody but who's not a friend of your friends. And that becomes a bridge to another community. Well, what Mark Granovetter discovered in the 1970s is actually the weak ties are very, very important. And they're very important because they usually open our mind. They usually connect us to a different circle of people. They're usually very important for creativity. If we just talk to our strong ties, there's no new information. We keep on repeating to each other the same stuff. It's almost like being in an echo chamber. But actually, weak ties are very important, perform a very important role because they open us up to a new universe. And so, again, this is what I was saying, strong ties with friends, colleagues, and family members. But, weak ties actually bring a lot of serendipity in our lives. And so we started looking at this point, and we hypothesized that removing our physicality is it going to make our weak ties weaker? Is it influence our community in terms of diversity? And as a consequence, could this impact productivity and creativity? So let me show you the data set. The data set, as I was saying, is the email data set. Is over 3,000 people on the MIT campus from 64 research units. And we also look, in order to anonymize, we also did a bit of randomization, but that doesn't change the substance of the data. You see here the representation of the data, the campus data, the total email data set, and some kind of little bit of due diligence on the data. And then we started analyzing. As I said, many things stayed the same before the pandemic and after the pandemic, say, before the closure of the campus and after the campus was shut down. But effectively, this hypothesis of weak ties turned out to be quite significant. And by the way, I'm showing you for the first time some of these images. We haven't published it yet. We're still working on it. But I really want to share with you tonight. And what we are seeing is basically, if you see here, you see on the x-axis, you see the date from March 2020 to March 2021, even April 2021 here. And then you see the number of weak ties on the y-axis. And what you see is that you see that there's a big decrease, a significant decrease here after the closing the campus. So you see here that this number goes down from 1,000 to around 800. You see it on this image as well, again, over time, how this has changed. More importantly, you see here, which is how fast new weak ties appear. And here you see, by the way, the campus is closed on the 23rd of March 2020. That's a red dotted line. But for the prior few weeks, 3-4 weeks, we started using very little physical space. And look at that. Actually, the number of new weak ties goes down from like 250 and goes down, created, 250 goes down to like 50. So it's a huge decrease in the formation of new weak ties. And you see it also on this graph here, in a slightly different way. So it looks like that if we remove physical space, then we remove a lot of weak ties. And what does it mean? Probably what we all anecdotally know. Weak ties are people we know, but they're not part of our inner circle. And then in physical space on campus, we might bump into them. We might bump into somebody who we know from before and say, hey, how are you? Let's have a coffee. Let's have dinner together. And while we're having that dinner, we will share experiences. And out of that, a new idea might pop up. We might be exposed and we might together develop something creative. We get this kind of serendipity of encounter that doesn't really happen in digital space. And well, I'll show you also visually. Visualizing a network is also usually a very good way to see this as well in a very compelling way. What you see here is actually the visualization of the email exchanges on the 20th of February 2020, so before the pandemic. And then here you see, for instance, on a year later, on February 25th, 2021, there's a big change in the structure of the network. And you see it here, actually. You see here is over time. You see February, April, June 2020, then September, November, February 2021. And you look at this, you see it's almost like, it's quite sad. It's almost like one brain where you're removing neurons that is becoming, much less connected. And again, we haven't published this, but we find the results very, very interesting because they really did tell us what happens when we don't meet in physical space and we just meet in digital space. We just meet virtually. Now, I'm an academic after all, so I want to share with you some of the references in case you're interested in some of the papers I mentioned, in particular the Granovetter paper from 1973 I mentioned, and some other related work. But the reason I'm showing you this to start the conversation is that, well, we just heard before, both with the survey and, in across all the Netherlands, that we want to keep the flexibility we enjoyed during the pandemic. So we want to keep the flexibility to work from home, to work from the countryside, from another city, to spend like a week somewhere else, and keep being connected and working with much more flexibility. And I think that's very good. But I think the result we just seen make me think that we also will want to go back to the office. We cannot work remotely forever in most cases. That's what actually Twitter was the first big company at the beginning of the pandemic a year ago said, from now onwards, you can work from home forever. it seems to me that based on this data, we're seeing that that in many cases is not the case. Physical space still has a very important function to perform, and it's really, it has the ability to make us meet in different ways, to make us meet when we haven't planned, we haven't got a slot on the agenda, on the calendar, to have a Zoom call or an in-person call, to make to bring serendipity to our lives, which is really how then we create ideas, and how we can make sure that together we are more than the sum of each individual part. Well, that was, kind of my 5 cents at the beginning. Where I say 5 cents, to be honest, the consequence of this, not of our research, but the consequence of what we are discussing today, are we going back to the office, is not a 5 cent question, is a $1 trillion question, or even more. I believe that the total value of real estate assets on the planet is in the order of $50 trillion. So somehow, it's a question with very, very big implications, with implications not only from a monetary point of view, but also in terms of affordability. Very, very important. Many people have been pushed out of cities because of rising property prices in recent years. So somehow the consequences of what we'll discuss today are, not only theoretical, not only beautiful research question for academics, but really a question with a lot of practical potential impact in our cities and in our world. Now, I will stop my sharing the screen, and I think I'd love to hear what you think and to really start a conversation.
And Divyanshu has asked the first question: how do you measure the quantify the weak ties numeric ally?
Sorry, could you repeat? How do we quantify the
Yeah.
weak tie?
How do you measure or quantify the weak ties numeric ally?
I'm trying to understand the numeric ally, but it's how you quantify. Again, in network science, what you do, you build a network. So you put nodes. Nodes are people, and then you create edges or links between people. And in this case, the link is if two people are exchanging emails, then you use that to create the network. And also networks, then they can be reciprocated or not. In this case, we use a reciprocated network. So if you use a reciprocated network, you want to have an email from A to B, but also from B to A. And the reason to use this is that, for instance, then it will remove all of those unidirectional emails that sometimes are sent in an institution at a university, where the head of department or the president will send an email to the whole community, and then everybody is connected. So anyway, that's how we build the network. And then when you got the network, you can start analyzing. And again, you can look at strong ties and weak ties, as I was saying before. Again, a strong tie is related to, in network science, to a parameter called the clustering coefficient that really tells you how many triangles you have around yourself. As I said, triangles are, person A, person B, and A and B also know each other. While, the weak ties are those links that actually are not friends of your friends, but are bridges to another community. So that's really what you do. You basically take the data from the email, you build the network as a reciprocated network with edges and links, with edges and ties. And then you analyze it, you go and mathematically look at the network in order to quantify what is happening. And there's an additional component, clearly, that we saw on the graphs, which is you really want to look at this over time. In this case, the network changes, and you see how fast you're creating new weak ties in people's network. So that's in a nutshell how you do it mathematically.
Okay. Maria Grazia is wondering what tools are most beneficial to support the office of the future.
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, it's part of the kind of the $50 trillion question we were saying before. Well, there's two things. What we don't know exactly, in the sense that the future is not something to predict. The future is something we will all contribute to shape. And the future in the Netherlands may also be different than the future in the US, in Australia, in Italy, in other countries, because some of the way we'll cope with the post-pandemic and going back to physical space will be country specific, culture specific. So again, the future is something that will depend on our actions individually and collectively. However, let's speculate on a few things. The first thing, what we were saying is that, we go back to the office, but we want flexibility. So what's the key parameter? The key parameter is how many days per week are we going to go back? And, if you look at the surveys, and if you also look at a recent report by McKinsey, many people expect that the flexibility will be changing based on your profession, but with something like 50%. And actually, a recent survey by McKinsey suggests the total number of square meters that companies want to lease for their employees is most likely going to go down up to 30%. So that's kind of the frame. Now, if you do that, if you spend in the office half of the week or so, then one key consequence for me is that it would be an absurd waste to have your own private desk. You don't want to have that because then it will be always empty. And if I think about the desk for a professor, usually academic real estate is the least intensively used I can think of. Professors by definition are never in their office. They are at a conference, they're traveling, they're in the classroom, they're meeting with students, and very rarely inside the office. And then if a lot of more activities are done virtually, then you would reduce even more the occupancy rate. So I think first consequence is that then you don't want to have individual desking. You want to go to move to a system which is very well known, has been in use in many companies for a number of years, which is hot desking. So you use the desk which is available when you go somewhere, but it's not your own private desk. And then if you do that, so again, back to the question, what are the tools that are most beneficial? What are tools that allow us to manage better space would be very important. And then I would say if we spend less time in the office, we want that the time is more productive in terms of week tie formation. So we might want to have tools that help, you could say, accelerate human interaction in the office. So again, tools that allow us to choreograph office life in a different way, even big data analytics that can help us to connect more with the people who could bring more value in terms of serendipity. So I would say, just speculating this kind of couple of tools. Again, the first one about how we can have tools that can help us to use better the space and the desk and things in a more flexible way with hot desking paradigm, and then also how we can have tools that make the most out of the limited time we will spend together.
Okay, the next question is from Furman. They wanted, you mentioned network diversity on the slides. Could you please elaborate on that? Network diversity.
Yeah, that was at the beginning of the slide, was not in the mathematical analysis, but it's the diversity is that there's a lot of literature, and that starts with Granovetter, but with many other sociologists, that actually shows that the kind of weak ties are connecting us to a diverse pool of ideas and people. Again, usually our strong ties are quite similar to us. There's usually an effect in network sciences called assortativity. We connect with people who are quite close to us and similar to us. But actually, the weak ties are usually bridges, as I was saying, to a broader pool of people and more diversity. So somehow there's a clear connection, which has been documented in many, again, that's why I show some of the references, but in many, in a lot of work, in a lot of research in sociology, that basically weak ties then directly connect and have an impact on diversity and also on creativity, in particular with creativity, because being exposed to diverse ideas.
So you would say that it's very important to have that diversity of network. Is that correct?
Yeah, totally. And I think, by the way, maybe a slightly broader conversation, this applies to our offices, but this also applies to our cities, to public space in our cities. When we only connect virtually, what happens is quite well known is that we end up in echo chambers. So in places where we keep on repeating to each other the same thing. And I think physical space is an antidote. And that applies to the office, as we said before, where we generate weak ties, but also to the city. You give a very simple example. I wasn't a great fan of the previous US president. And probably in my circle of other professors at MIT, other people and people I know, also I didn't have many supporters of the former MIT president. But every time I would go down in the streets in a city in the United States, even in liberal cities such as Boston, Cambridge, or New York, a significant percentage of the population, was actually a fan of, or the previous U.S. president, and had somehow to confront, especially during, if there were some discussion or something else, to confront diversity and different opinions. So somehow physical space is very important because it kicks us out of our echo chamber and exposes us to a broader set of people and ideas. And I think that's very, very important. And that's also what makes life richer.
Thank you so much. You've mentioned the home and office balance will change. Is there any research that you know of about the productivity changes from that?
Very good question. I think productivity is very difficult to measure in a universal way. I think something interesting is that we will get some of the economic data from the past few months can help us elucidate that at an aggregate level, at the kind of macroeconomic level. It's a bit more difficult at the microeconomic level. What we are trying to do on the MIT campus, is that for professor productivity is more easily defined. Of course, you teach classes and you supervise students, and that is set. So somehow you have to do that. But then in the remaining time, the productivity is measured primarily through patents and papers. And so what I didn't show is that as part of the analysis that I showed you before, we're also looking at patent and paper productivity to see if actually remote working had an impact on that. Now, apart from this, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. I think, to me, the past 12 months have been interesting because they've been, first of all, an accelerated crash course for all of us to learn new tools. I had never used Zoom a year and a half ago. And so now everybody's conversant, even people who were a little conversant with digital tools. Now we're all conversant with digital tools and connectivity. I think that is good. I think some things have been changed forever, such as the crazy things we used to do. People have done before, like, going from New York to Singapore for a 3-hour meeting and flying back. Crazy for your health and crazy even more so for the environment. So somehow the impact of digital has changed some things forever. And so, as I was saying, this has been a crash course, and we all have learned a lot of these new tools with consequences in the long term.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Ahmed. And he asked, you mentioned strong ties and that you use friends of friends, which is one method for finding similarities. Have you thought about using other similarities, such as checkered cats?
It's not that, I mean, perhaps I want just to clarify my point. That perhaps it's slightly different. I'm not sure if it's exactly, if I was clear. What I'm saying is simply, I'm not saying that we are trying to get similar people through friends of friends. What I was just saying is that, just as a snapshot, it's only a definition. Think about this just, as a very basic definition. Take all of your friends, you can classify them in 2 categories. And it's just a classification. So I wasn't saying, and these 2 categories are the category of strong ties. So I know person A, I know person B, and they're also friends with each other. And I call them a strong tie. A and B are a strong tie because they're also friends with each other. If you draw them, if you plot that, you get a triangle. And then on the other hand, I got, these kind of links where I know person C, who's not a friend of any other of my friends. And then that becomes more like a bridge to another community. And so I call that like a weak tie. A weak tie doesn't mean I'm talking less, I know the person less well. It can be a very close person as well, but is not a friend of my friends. Is a connection to another community. So it was not what I was implying was not that that we might be using strong ties to get people closer to us or friends of friends. Simply is a definition. Now, it is, however, proven in the sociology literature that there's more similarity of ideas, for instance, if you look at strong ties. And again, because information tends to go in circle in the triangle, we keep on repeating to each other the same things. So I hope this probably clarified better what I wanted to mean.
And if not, just like we said before, please state your question in the chat and we'll make sure to answer it. Professor, you also do a lot of research about cities of the future, and I'm wondering, how does your research, what does it state about the future of the cities? How will they look in the future?
Yeah, thanks. Here I'm sorry to disappoint you, because I don't think that our cities will be that different tomorrow. Let me look at this another way. For instance, today we're still living in cities. Think about beautiful Amsterdam. You mentioned the Netherlands before. Was built hundreds of years ago. In Italy, there's still people living in buildings and parts of cities built 2,000 years ago in Roman times. Think about Split in Croatia. That where there's chunks of the city again that have been inhabited for over 2,000 years. So the cities have a lot of permanence, and what changes and what is changing today is not necessarily physical appearance of the city. In the same way, it has been quite permanent. As humans, we need horizontal floors for moving. We need facades to protect us from the outside. We need windows to look outside and to do air changes and to let light in. So some of those kind of fundamentals, you could call it the fundamentals of architecture, like my colleague and friend Rem Koolhaas would have said. So the fundamentals are quite stable. And, they've been like this for hundreds of years and probably will be similar in the future. I think what will change is not necessarily that much a physical form of the city. Yes, we get new materials and so on, but even the most recent cities look quite similar to cities built decades ago. Yes, new materials, but most importantly is the life in the city. And the life in the city is going to change radically in the same way as think how much it changed in the past 20 years. We couldn't get an Uber 20 years ago, get a zip car. We couldn't, just navigate the city with GPS before the smart, in an easy way. We could in a difficult way, but in an easy way before the smartphone was introduced a little over 10 years ago. So somehow, there's been an incredible change in the way we live the city at the intersection of digital and physical. And I think that's a vector where we'll see most of the changes in the future. Not really in the physical appearance of the city, but in how to live in it.
Thank you. Balakrishnan has a very practical question. How did you manage to get more than 3,000 emails?
Oh, no, again, sorry, maybe I should clarify. This is not 3,000 emails, anonymized emails. First of all, we don't know anything about the emails. We don't know about the people. The people are just nodes on the network, and we use both anonymization and randomization, as I mentioned before. But this is the exchange of emails. So as I said, you look at all the people, and then you put a link between them if they are exchanging information via email. So that's a standard way to build what's called a communication network in this case, or a social network more generally, between people.
Excellent. Joe has a question about that, perhaps. Do you know if anyone has looked at a weak tie activity on virtual platforms, such as social media sites? It would be interesting if there were also a drop-off there, since in theory, the shutdown shouldn't impact that.
It's a very good point. I think, as I said, I showed you today for the first time these results. These results are still quite new, and so far we've been looking at them only on the MIT campus. Now, what the MIT campus suggests is that today, at least, weak ties emerge easily in physical space, but they don't emerge very easily in digital space. And I think you can understand that. For instance, today we are creating a lot of potential weak ties, because there's a conversation with many of you and so on. But when we do this, I think if you look at digital connectivity, when we do something like this, like a conversation with many people, maybe somebody answering questions like I'm doing now, then it's not easy that we'll end up having dinner together anytime soon. Maybe we'll exchange an email, yes, or there would be a quick follow-up. But somehow, the richness of weak ties is that they lead to very deep and meaningful conversation with people who are not part of our inner circle. And so this type of thing today is not happening digitally in conditions such as the one where we are in now, even if they could potentially, but again, they usually, such conditions don't lead to that kind of more deeper, meaningful conversation that we might have by deciding, let's have a coffee together, let's have dinner together. And also they don't happen with all the Zoom, Teams, Blue Jeans, you name it, whatever, WebEx and GoToMeeting, whatever platform you like, meetings we have, which are usually scheduled meetings with strong ties. When we talk to our colleagues at work, there are strong ties. We know all of them, they know each other, and we talk and we make decisions. So somehow the digital tools today seems to privilege strong ties when we do traditional Teams or Zoom meetings, or when we do something like what we are doing now. There's potential weak ties, but there's a difficulty to follow up in that meaningful way. They remain more superficial. They don't remain long-term weak ties, which are really the one that allow us to be exposed to different ideas and to new communities and circles. So somehow, what our research suggests is that today digital is not equipped to create weak ties. Maybe in the future, new tools might lead us to more weak tie creation. But what we're seeing is that actually weak ties seem to emerge naturally in physical space.
Thank you so much. Those were the questions for now. Is there anything else you would like to share about the Office 3.0?
There's many things we could talk about. But maybe just share a couple of thoughts, just in random order. One thing is, well, if we spend another consequence is not about the office in particular, but about how offices are distributed and where we live. And again, if, as we said before, we are going to go to the office 50% of the time, then, maybe we can work in another place, not necessarily in suburbs, but, we could work in some of those polycentric nodes. Today, there's been a lot of work on the idea of the polycentric city, where we can spend, half of the week in a beautiful environment, maybe cheaper, with more access to nature or, better air quality, and then just 1, 2, or 3 days per week go to the big city. So those have to be places that are these kind of nodes that are well connected with the place where the headquarter where we're working is, but where we can have a good quality of life. And so, for instance, I could see that my impression is that something that could happen. Again, if you look at the Netherlands as a possible reference, in the Netherlands, you could imagine that a lot of people living in Amsterdam, where life is beautiful but also quite expensive, might, I don't know, go and live in Delft, in Haarlem, in some of those other places that are quite close, because again, they can spend half of the week there or in the middle of the countryside and then just jump on a train and in 45 minutes commute to Amsterdam when they need a couple of times a week. So that could be an interesting consequence. Again, all will depend on still many questions, including, of course, cultural conditions. So I don't think we'll see one solution fits all. Two parameters will be crucial. Again, cultural condition, and also the level of remote working we had before the pandemic. For instance, in Australia, there was a lot of smart working before COVID. And so now that things are reopening, it looks like almost things didn't change that much. While in other countries, where people really had to be present in the office 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 p.m., well, that's probably where we'll see more changes in the next few months.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Carlo Ratti.